Dr. Ronald Holloway is the principal sachem for the Sand Hill and Band and Raritan Lenape Cherokee and Cherokees. His background and repertoire includes a diverse array of experiences that stem from his doctorate of divinity, his time in the Marine Corps, his suite of current security licensing series certifications, as well as his notable expertise in the sphere of international relations. I had this condensed and I'm not sure where that went, so I'm going to just introduce Chief Yanaguska, so that we can stay on schedule. All right.
Am I good to go, Dr.
Yes.
Graymorning?
Yes.
And you can hear me and you can see my face for proof of life.
Yes.
All right. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak at the Raising Indigenous Voices in Academia and Society conference, and a special thanks to Dr. Graymorning for organizing this event. I am the hereditary principal sachem of the Sandhill Band of Raritan, Lenape, and Cherokee Indians, Dr. Ronald Holloway, and I also serve as the Minister of International Affairs for the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas, which is referred to as FANA. Today I'll be talking to you about the power of dreaming. For context, I ground my presentation in primary sources, historical accounts from Delaware prophets, secondary source materials through scholarship, including Dr. Kevin Inglesby, as well as contemporary actions that have influenced global indigenous policies today. By doing so, I will outline three key pillars that are central to this presentation. The first is cultural and creative agency. The next is forms of political resistance. And the final feature of this presentation will round out with contemporary economic strategies that effectuate the composite of these interconnected elements. In the present context, these features accumulate through collective actions to support the idea and ethos of honoring the sacred while living right now. And that's important to remember. We remember our ancestors, we remember our pasts, we remember those that have come before us, but we don't lose track of the fact that we are occupying the skin right now because of the sacrifices they made to get us here. I also want to clarify that I will cover some of the preconditions to the Federation that relate to different fronts associated with the Delaware Nation. I will talk about growing initiatives and trends connected to Delaware prophets in the 1700s, and we'll also cover institutional conditions that developed in Sheekbe itself. Sheekbe is known also as New Jersey. And importantly, there exists a covenant chain with the Delaware Nation that implicates the Treaty of Easton in 1758. Through the Easton meeting in 1758, the Treaty of Easton established the grounds for the Brotherton Reservation in New Jersey, and in doing so, established a hybrid form of tax-exempt property rights, specific plans of the Raritan Lenape Indians residing in the south of the Raritan River in New Jersey would be able to take advantage of. With that in mind, the context of traditional forms of expression and heritage retention in southern Sheekbe intimately relate to the powers of dreaming as an impetus or driving force for creative agency and political resistance. With that context setting the stage, the powers of dreaming are manifest in cultures around the globe and become operational in distinct ways. For some examples, it is well known that ancient Egypt revered dreams as communication from their vast array of gods. The Greeks actively recorded and classified many of their dreams, and among the Sufis in Islam, practices of interpreting dreams contain highly developed systems of social ordering. Among indigenous institutions here on Turtle Island, the Haudenosaunee are known to engage in dream-sharing practices whereby communal rituals are often exercised as a mechanism to maintain certain features of community order and bond building. Among the Delaware Nation, dreaming rituals and ceremonies are not limited to a particular social class in our society. They occupy a central role among the pillars that uphold our social order. The Delaware Nation is classified as an ancient cultural system with records of institutional operations spanning from 10,000 BCE down to this very current day. And these things have been noted by scholars such as Herbert C. Kraft. Different records of the Delaware institutional operation directly connect the concepts of culture, creative agency, and concrete political outcomes that both reflect and demonstrate the strength dreaming has had in the Delaware community over at least the last 260 years. Early missionaries, such as the Moravian minister Zeisberg, have written accounts about the importance of dreaming in Delaware communities, like the one that follows. And I quote, "To the dreams they appeal, for in them they have much faith. Thus, one may in a dream see a fierce animal. Upon this he will ponder much, believing that it was not by chance, but rather that it signifies a gift or special power making him a favored man." End quote. Historically, dreaming rites and ceremonies, the specific practices within the broader occasion, were performed in what we call in English the big house. The big house is traditionally known by its Delaware name, Shingwakan, and signifies concepts of cultural purity and a more robust ecological connection to both spirit systems and the general environment. Our spirit systems are represented through the Manitow, specifically the greater and lesser scales of the Manitow, and our spirits are historically known to engage and communicate with us through dreams to different degrees. To the Delaware, the interior of the big house represents the recreation of the entire universe. It is a literal microcosm of the whole. The floor represents the earth connection, the walls representing quadrants of the universe, the ceiling represents the sky and its connection to our elders, the sun and the moon. On a variety of different posts that support the big house, an array of Manitou spirits are carved so as to establish potential for face-to-face engagements with our gods and spirits via the use of individual masks. A very prominent spirit is known as the Masingwa. The Masingwa spirit is of singular importance to the well-being of every Lenape Indian, for it is his responsibility to look after the animals in the forests and to ensure their health and safety, as well as the maintenance of discipline and social controls amongst humans. With that in mind, the center post of the Big House Church contained carved faces of the Masingwa. In the Delaware language, the specific term for that post is the Mesingkau. This is a very important feature because typically these traditional observances, even being able to see the post itself, entails that a ceremonial proceeding was occurring and that dreams would be involved to different extents. It is well documented that foreign religious actors, such as the Moravians in New Jersey, for example, took great issue with big house ceremonies as well as dreaming rituals and practices. In protest to native rituals, conservative Christian missionaries would promote the abandonment of practice like dream recitation or engagements with the Manitow spirits. In response to the social and spiritual encroachment many settlers and representatives of the church made into the lives of the Delaware citizens, there are a variety of examples of individuals utilizing traditional practices as strict forms of resistance to colonial norms and beliefs. Interestingly, there came a point in which ritual forms that would typically be limited to being expressed in the big house were expressed outside of the Shinwakan as an urgent form of protest to colonial expansion. Kraft recounts that along the upper Susquehanna River in May 1745, David Bernard, a well-known Presbyterian missionary, encountered an Indian prophet attired in what appears to have been the regalia of a Mishingwa Khan. His message advocated a return to the traditional ways of the past that include practices like dream recitation ceremonies. The regalia of a Mishingwa Khan signifies the impersonator, or the person wearing the mask of the Mishingwa spirit, the masked being, if you would. A missionary encountered a traditional practitioner outside the big house is signified and notably reflects an urgency in protesting colonial habits and systems of cosmological engagement. Importantly, this trend would be sustained by other Delaware citizens over the following decades. Around 1753, another prophet, Papuanan by name, arose among a band of Munsee living in and about Lackawanna, Pennsylvania. Papuanan's message and teaching also promoted a return to a tradition through specific practices, namely through support for Lenape rites such as dream recitation rituals as direct expressions of communicating with Delaware spirit systems. Because dreams and dream recitation rituals retain a significant position of truth value in our social organization and meaning-making systems, each of these prophets' expressions began to accumulate different tensions held towards colonial enterprises from the specific base of cosmology. Dream recitations themselves are highly symbolic functions, and one mechanism for sharing dreams is associated with strengthening the ties of the Lenape citizens through inter-clan coordination. So as colonial opposition to our cosmological expressions continued to saturate interactions between citizens of the Delaware Nation and colonial representatives, practices of dreaming began to be channeled into domains beyond the social boundaries of the Lenape to other indigenous nations as they had once normatively been in select locales. In that sense, dreaming rituals are known to be a driving force that have helped transform concrete political circumstances like intertribal coordination by influencing subsequent kinetic actions. The period between 1753, when Papuanan was promoting a return to the traditional, and 1773, when the Delaware dreaming recitations reached the Ottawa war chief Pontiac, is a very complex set of circumstances in which a variety of different mechanisms were in simultaneous operation. It is important to contextualize that Papuanan's message and teachings in Lackawanna, Pennsylvania, occurred in the northern Munsee region. However, other political circumstances were underway in southern Sheakby or New Jersey, south of the Raritan River. Raritan Indians were engaging in unique diplomatic engagements centered around remaining in their homeland in spite of the drastic urbanization that was underway all around them. By doing so, of the 13 different tribal bodies present for the Easton meetings, Raritan Unami leaders were among them and ultimately demarcated a political, linguistic, and social boundary marker between those Unami Indians to the south and Munsee Indians to the north of the Raritan River system. As a form of cultural and political hybridization, the Raritan Unamis staked a claim utilizing settler legal instruments as one form of sustaining their heritage practices, among other reasons. The Treaty of Easton in 1758 would set the textual parameter for the Brotherton Reservation, where during the years of its operation, many Raritan Unami resided. Although there are clear non-intercourse act violations that dissolved the Brotherton Reservation, the Sandhill Band of Raritan, Lenape, and Cherokee Indian clan lines remained in the surrounding areas south of the Raritan River as freeholders, craftsmen, and upheld our government as well as relationships to Sheakby and the Manitow spirit systems. However, In the years leading up to what would become the Royal Proclamation of 1763, as well as Pontiac's Rebellion, Delaware dream recitation would resonate westward beyond the boundaries of traditional Lenapehoking, or the land of the Lenape people. With the context, Neolin and other prominent Delaware prophet conveyed a catalyzing dream recitation in 1762 that would ultimately help to invigorate a political movement against the growing British powers. Neolin recounted that he had, through communications with his dreams, that he must visit a supreme being, in his words, the master of life. To the Delaware, our supreme being or creator is known as Kishelamacunk. Kishelamacunk is the being responsible for creating the world with his mind, his processes of dreaming, and has the duty of sustaining the complexity of our biosphere. In Neolin's case, he seemed to have directly utilized and shared cultural units of dreaming, expressed as a form of creative agency to help motivate particular forms of political resistance. Part of the political importance of this circumstance is multifaceted. On one side of the resistance stems from the consistent attacks by the settlers, by missionaries like the Moravians and the Presbyterians on a broad range of Delaware cosmological systems, including dreaming practices. That one side of cosmological resistance signifies some limits of Neolin's range of rejection towards colonial semiotic systems. However, another side of Neolin's resistance left the world of symbolic action and transitioned into concrete physical resistance through physical force. Although prior to driving into elements of the armed resistance, it's important to understand how Neolin's substantiated and justified his position. Accordingly, Neolin recounted that he set off on an 8-day journey towards the celestial realm. He depicted this journey in the heavenly map he designed and inscribed it into different mediums, such as buckskin. This map served as a mnemonic or memory device and was disseminated among select individuals like Pontiac and many others. In the course of his journey, through which the natural forces of dreaming influenced relations between interpretation and action, there are accounts that Neolin halted at the first sunset to establish shelter and cook a meal. Historian Alfred Cave analyzed features of Neolin's journey and included that as Neolin cooked his meal, in the gathering twilight, he was astounded to see that the 3 roads in front of him became all the brighter as the darker it grew, a thing that surprised him to the point of fear. But as he reflected on the strange apparition, he came to realize that one of those roads must lead to the Master of Life, the object of his quest. Neolin would recount experiencing the presence of the Master of Life, who told him of different offenses that must be rectified. Of these external foreign-driven offenses, the toleration of European intruders by the Delaware and other nations was articulated to Neolin as the most egregious. Toleration of European intruders was perceived as one vector that facilitated the degradation of traditional native norms, customs, ecological responsibilities, and habits. That notwithstanding, great importance is stably placed in striving to maintain a harmony with traditional norms, rights, and duties by performing rituals like dreaming ones, to uphold favorable relations with the Mashingwa spirit, the masked being, for example. To do so, Alfred Cave recounts that Neolin was told the Master of Life that to regain his favor and restore the game animals that once sustained his people, the Indians must resist further European incursion. Further, Cave recounts that Neolin was informed specifically by Kishelamacunk that as those who come to trouble your land, drive them out, make war upon them, I, that is the Master of Life, do not love them at all. They know me not, and are my enemies. Send them back to the lands which I have created, and let them stay there. The Creator called for Indian unity and assured his children that when ye shall need of anything, address yourselves to me. And as to your brothers, I shall give it to you as to them. Do not sell your brothers what I have put on the earth for food. In short, be good, and ye shall receive your needs. When you meet one another, exchange greetings and proffer the left hand, which is nearest the heart. Nealon's readiness to share these experiences with his wider community served to concretize features of living cosmological experience. The enforcement of these codes aided in the maintenance of requisite truth values among his community to engage political agency. And in the process, these recognized levels of truth among individuals like Pontiac would serve to promote and drive violent social and political change. Nealon preached a message of transformation, and that exhorted the Delaware and their allies to return to their ancestral ways, to conditions that prevailed before the coming of the white man. In that way, Nealon was called the Enlightened by his followers. However, as would be expected, the British, upon hearing these developments, began to refer to Nealon as the impostor, as a rhetorical mode that seemed to attempt to undermine his legitimacy and hopefully stave off any political action Nealon's followers may be inspired to take. As I've already expressed, among those who came under the influence of Nealon's teaching was Pontiac, a war chief of the Ottawa, and one of the French's staunchest allies, and an enemy of the British. After the British consolidated power over the French, they also destroyed any level of coexisting relations with the indigenous. The British managed to make the situation much worse as they proceeded to take over the conquered French fortresses and clash with indigenous institutions and social forces. The office of the historian preserves that. British officials made the situation worse by alienating American Indians who had been allied with the French during the 7 Years' War. The French government had devoted significant resources to furnishing gifts to their Indian allies. When the British forces arrived to take over former French forts, they halted the gift-giving practice, not realizing that doing so undercut the authority of any pro-British leaders within indigenous communities and antagonized the Indian leaders. These concrete political actions undermined the British forces' hold over those territories to an extent that would serve to inform further and diplomatic defensive maneuvers by the British through different treaty instruments like the Treaty of Fort Pitt, which is a highly significant political tool for the Delaware Nation. Today, political and legal instruments such as the Treaty of Fort Pitt and the Treaty of Easton and traditional cultural intersections with the powers of dreaming have yielded a quite unique landscape for the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas. And I will give you a contemporary insight into how we still use dreaming today. My father, who was chief before me, when I was first picked from council to be chairman and next in line to be chief, he began telling me of a recurring dream that he had had between 6 and 12 times, and it was always the same dream. And we would go for a walk and we would look at the Delaware River and other places, and he would say, son, I had this dream again. And the dream was you and I were traveling up and down the eastern seaboard, and we were finding the last of the chiefs that were not stuck inside the BIA's trust system. The last of the chiefs that still held treaties, the last of the chiefs that would be in a position to enforce them. And he kept saying that he keeps being told we need to gather these chiefs together to make one organization that has the ability to withstand and resurrect some of our ways. And when he retired, that was one of the last things he reminded me of. He said, don't give up the search, because I know that dream is true. So when I became chief, I started looking up and down the eastern seaboard for what was left of tribes that had the ability to stand and had not bent a knee to the U.S. yet. So I went to the United Nations like anybody would, and I met Chief Two Hawks, who's chief of the Narragansett. And then I met Chief Winds of Thunder, who's the 16th generation grandson of King Philip from the wars that happened at the beginning of the country, the Pokanoket. And together we put together an organization called the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas. This organization has grown so tremendously over the last 15 years that my father would be proud if he saw it today. We have collected chiefs from the Oneida, the Mohawk, the Pokanoket, the Niagansett, the remaining chiefs that belong to part of the Delaware Nation, the remaining portions of the Tuscarora in the South. We have first put together an organization of first contact tribes that were still surviving, basically the Eastern Seaboard European ones that bore the brunt of the original invasion. And now as we have expanded to include 120 million souls. We are literally the largest indigenous organization on the planet. Our membership, just in raw membership, spans from the Pokanoket in the north to the Mosquito in Central America, to the Lenca in Central America, down to the biggest tribes in Suriname, all of the Garifuna around the world that exist in Belize and in Central America. We're in the middle of negotiations with other portions of tribes that are in Peru and Ecuador. We have the Talpan, the Chortega, the Chormaya, the Pan, all of Central America. We even have SCNI in cross treaty, SCNI being the largest indigenous confederation, standalone by itself, 69 dialects, 49 million people in Mexico. All are counted as cross treated with FANA, with a head count of slightly more than 120 million souls. And it took a few years to realize that in North America, there were only so many tribes and so many peoples available, but that there are close to 1 billion indigenous around the globe. We went on to sign treaties with the 6th region of the African Union. We're in discussions with other portions of the Caribbean, and we would anticipate another 25 million inductees within the next less than a year. All because of my father's dream that he kept having, and he passed it on to me. And I have been following that successfully, and that guidance has steered us, and it still steers us from a traditional standpoint. So dreams are very, very important to the indigenous. It's part of our cosmology and who we are. Where do we anticipate going with this? I would say before this time next year, we will be well underway, because we're doing cross treaties right now with all the different organizations. We have the intentions of opening up the world's first ever indigenous free trade zone. As we now have adherents all around the Gulf, we have the Alihi Nui out of Hawaii, and then those treaties go all the way out to the main chiefs in Tahiti, Guam, Vanuatu, King Monga in the North Island of New Zealand. So if you go from Tahiti to Africa, from Canada to South America, we have tribes with portage on both sides, the Gulf and the Pacific, the northern portions of North America, into South America, out through Asia Pacific, and into Africa. And all the assets are being totaled as we know now. And basically what we're going to do is just put the assets, convert them into green harvesting approaches, which is underway. We have engineers out there looking in the different areas with our treaty allies and FANA members. And then we're going to actually begin to put the reconfigured hard assets into the marketplace, but managed by the indigenous with a green backing and a green look going forward, because we're planning 7 generations forward. We don't really do the 200-minute moving average and the stuff that they do on Wall Street. We're talking about hard assets that are actually owned by the indigenous that are needed around the globe. The only difference is the middlemen are being kicked out. And that all just comes from a dream that was passed on from my father to me, which is consistent with the importance that dreams play in indigenous cosmology. And that would be my presentation, Dr. Gray Morning. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them. If there aren't any, then I got off easy.
Um, Sydney? Sydney?
Yes, I want to thank you for that. I think it was beautiful, Chief. And I want to put you in contact with some of the Brazilian indigenous people that I work with and have contact. And I think that would be helpful to them to join your organization. But what I want to go back to is your notion of dreaming.
Mhm.
One of the hats I wear is I'm past president of the Anthropology of Consciousness section of the American Anthropological Association. And I want to say that the dreaming you're referring to is entering into an alternative state of consciousness in which information is available to the body and into the brain that creates an alternative reality, but a reality in itself. And this reality enables you to realistically communicate with ancestors and supernaturals and do exactly what you're talking about. When I talk tomorrow about the Pitagori and Anase and their connection with the Lakota, this essentially is part of what is happening there by making this connection, and they are able to reconstruct a reality that's different from that not only of the missionaries, but of the larger Western civilization in itself, which has its own distinctive reality. So
I agree with you 100%. The chiefs that I deal with chuckle at me frequently because I always refer to it as my guides helped me to appreciate, or what I saw on the teleprompter yesterday, or there's a lot of euphemisms that are used in describing what you're talking about, but the ability to be available with it, to be in stream and harmonious energetically, to receive the subtle messages that can be picked up throughout our existence is important. And most people in the West, unfortunately, are missing that entire perspective in their lives.
exactly, exactly.
Thank you, sir. And I would welcome those contacts as we are looking very focusedly on that exact area that you're talking about, introductions. We've actually begun discussing inroads into that larger society down there because we believe that all of the indigenous that are truly sovereign belong in an organization that supports, protects, and enhances our way of life that has existed before the Europeans knew how to build castles.
Yes.
Are there any other questions, Dr. Gray Morning?
Um, yeah, I'm formulating a question that keeps coming in and out. Dreams have always been an important aspect within Native culture. Wamoka, and I guess in the words of Chief Dan George in the movie Little Big Man, he said, sometimes the medicine works and sometimes it doesn't. Um, and that's what we've seen sometimes with dreaming. With the Little Bighorn, Makithya Luta had dreamt a success in that battle. And there are times when it works and times when it doesn't work. But with regard to Fana, this is an organization, and I mentioned this to you when you were here at University of Montana, how when I was getting my doctoral degree, I was talking about an international organization that can span across borders. And that's what FANA has done. And I'm curious to know where the end result is, because the larger FANA gets, the more it will be seen as a threat from the United States government. And how do we navigate around that?
That's a big question, Doc. I could see how the current administration might be a bit concerned as to the growth. We don't anticipate stopping. As you know, sovereign tribes, the Mosquito have their own 1,000,000+ acres. The Lenca have 65 square miles of land. They're all FANA members. So FANA has sovereign land outside of the United States. We're not necessarily looking for or really caring about what the U.S. has to say. I sent you a copy of the decree that we issued, I think it was about 3-4 weeks ago. That decree was the result of years of analysis. And what we did is we opened up our treaty rights to everybody that was in cross treaty with us, thereby making them in treaty with the United States. And since our treaties predate the 1789 Constitution, they can't even get rid of our treaties because they're ratified from before that time. So we expect the United States to honor our ratified treaties. We've just never had an opportunity to have chiefs enforce it, because the tradition of the United States is, Treaty of Fort Pitt basically says, okay, we'll cede Lenapehoking and we get X in return. As far as land goes, we have the right inside of that treaty to form our own confederation, and it's encouraged by the United States. We have the right to have our own court system. It's in writing. So we built our own court system. We're in the process of notifying them what the rules are that we've decided to play by inside of the treaties that we hold. And the reason they hadn't been exercised in the past is as soon as our allies, the Cherokee, won in the Supreme Court, and I will point out they did win, Jackson decided to round the Cherokee and the Delaware up and move them to Oklahoma because they were too much of a threat. The Cherokee would get to keep their land. The Delaware had claims on other lands, so they just moved them, and then they shot them. Unfortunately, from a tactical standpoint, they didn't shoot all the heirs. And because they didn't take out the heirs, and we were fastidious in how we collected paperwork and converted it, we kept all the documents and we maintained a concrete hold on the land that we've never left. So all of the things that would be necessary for them to dislodge us, they can't with us. I don't anticipate us stopping. It'll run when we run out of indigenous that don't wish to exercise their rights. But we're moving into a space now where we're using other treaty organizations and confederation partners' sovereign lands in other countries, which the U.S. has no control over. We're not doing anything. We're not violating the Logan Act. We're not doing anything other than building an organization that wishes to compete on a global scale with assets that we already own. We don't want anything from the U.S. We own what we own. We're just not going to have Halliburton and the big guys come in, take it from us, and mark it up like they had been doing in the Sahel. We're building the win in advance. A lot of organizations will go to court, and then when they win, they don't know how to win the peace. The U.S. has that problem when they go overseas and blow up people. They're great at destroying. They have absolutely no idea whatsoever how to win the peace and build civilizations back. So we're just building everything in advance, and we believe in pivoting, flanking, making oblique maneuvers. I happen to having been a Marine and having been a police officer, I've read every book that they teach at West Point. As you know, I've stood on the parade grounds at West Point and been awarded from West Point for working out a peace treaty between the Buffalo Soldiers and the indigenous. My job is to put everybody back together so that 7 generations from now, we're all still here. I don't anticipate us ever stopping. I would see advanced mechanisms of development coming forth probably in 27 We've just been given clearance from a number of countries to go ahead and do full build outs on our treaty partners and FANA members, where we're building civic centers, post offices, banks, all of that stuff that you would normally do here in the US, but because it's overly the US has an extremely big, God, I'm trying not to do this, racial undertone. Being FANA's chief diplomat, I have to be careful. So we've got multiple strategies. We've got partners all over the globe, and we're just bypassing the U.S. altogether. They want to just do what you're going to do, and we're just going to enforce the treaties that we've got. Next week we'll have another piece out, was a complementary piece to the decree that we issued explaining what the rules are for the Confederation and what our sovereign court system rules will be. It's allowed under our treaty. We haven't stepped out of it. We're not a threat. We're just saying, hey, we got a contract. Escrow's not closed. You thought when you shot all of us that it was just going to go away. It didn't. I've already been to court. Kevin has shown you in some of the work that I would have won had I not run out of money. So we're just coming back again to enforce. Am I overtime, sir?
Yes.
Well, it's good for me. Those get tough questions, sir. Thank you very much for inviting us. I do enjoy the school and the visits that we've had over there. I thank you. I thank you for what you've done for our organization, because Kevin has been a fantastic piece that has revolutionized how we're putting things together because of his scholarly work. And there are so many attorneys now that are pulling his stuff out of the Library of Congress. It's not even funny, because nobody's ever done anything in the Northeast because they just ran over us and stuffed it in the Smithsonian where you can't get to it. So now we're back, and we're not going anywhere, and we're planning 7 generations out, and we can read and we can write, and we know as much or more now because we have enough doctors, PhDs, JDs, and the whole list of alphabet people. And we just go about our business. Thank you, Doctor. And thank all of you very much for tolerating me. I wish you a successful conference on behalf of myself at Dr. Inglesby, and of course, all of the members, the core members of the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of the Americas, and all 120 million human souls that we have in cross treaty through the various continents.
Thank you.